Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books. And Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're very honored to be gathered with all of you in person and virtually to celebrate Big Girl, the novel by Mecca Jamilah Sullivan, and to be joined in conversation with Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall. We have been so excited about this novel from the first announcement about it, because we have admired Dr. Sullivan's work for many, many years. And so when you have seen somebody work in lots of different fields and then they write a novel, you know, we're all secret novel stands. So that's what we're always wanting. It's very exciting. We're joined tonight as well by our friends at Sinister Wisdom. And I'm going to introduce Sharmona Mandal, who's a board member of Sinister Wisdom. And they're going to tell you a little bit about Sinister Wisdom before we get started.
Hi everyone, thank you for letting me open for the amazing main event. Sinister Wisdom is a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art in circulation since 1976. Currently in its 46th year of circulation, Sinister Wisdom is also much more than a publication. It has been a way for lesbian communities to gather internationally and intergenerationally to read, write, learn, and reflect together. I had the amazing fortune of getting to know Dr. Sullivan's work through Sinister Wisdom as a reader, as an intern, and then got luckier and got to be part of the board with her. I'm really excited for tonight, and if you have already read A Big Girl and are really looking to read some more of Dr. Sullivan's work, please come and pick up Sinister Wisdom at Charis Books or become a subscriber at sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. And without further ado, thank you.
Yes, thank you. We're always excited to work with Sinister Wisdom, and I see that the editor, Julie Insert, is in the virtual house. And we have many Sinister Wisdom folks watching with us virtually around the world, so welcome to all of you. I'm first going to introduce Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall. Dr. Guy-Sheftall is a Black feminist scholar, writer, and editor who is the Anna Julia Cooper Professor of Women's Studies and English at Spelman College right here in Atlanta, Georgia. She is the founding director of the Spelman College Women's Research and Resource Center, the first at a historically Black college or university. Dr. Guy-Sheftall has published a number of texts within African American and women's studies, which include the first anthology ever on Black women's literature, Sturdy Black Bridges, Visions of Black Women in Literature, which came out from Doubleday in 1979. And her catalog, of course, extends all the way into this contemporary moment. But we have asked her to be with us today in the capacity of celebrating and honoring Dr. Mecca Jamilah Sullivan, who is the author of Big Girl, the novel we're celebrating tonight, which is a 2022 most anticipated pick from Vulture, Ms., Goodreads, and SheReads.com. Her previous books are The Poetics of Difference, Queer Feminist Forms in the African Diaspora, and the short story collection Blue Talk and Love, which was the winner of the Judith Markowitz Award for Fiction from Lambda Literary. She is an associate professor of English at Georgetown University, a native of Harlem. She currently lives in Washington, D.C. So, thank you to all of our friends who are joining with us tonight. Thank you to both of you. It's a real special evening to get to celebrate this book.
Thank you. I'm always happy to be at Charis. I've been coming to Charis since Charis opened, and I've also been reading Sinister Wisdom since it first was published. So we're going to be on first name, so I'm Beverly and Mecca. So let's start, Mecca, by you sharing with us something of your background, where you grew up, and we know that's Harlem, your schooling, your journey as a writer, poet, scholar, professor, now novelist. So you just talk to us a little bit about who this amazing person is.
Oh, well, thank you. Sure. And I have to say thank you so much to Charis, to Sinister Wisdom. Thank you, Beverly, for being here. I'm so excited to share with you all, to talk with you about this novel, and kind of get into some of the things that I think sort of bring the novel in conversation with the mission of a place like Charis, the work that we do with scholars. So yes, I mean, right, born and raised in Harlem, New York. It's funny, I was in a Lyft here in Atlanta, and the Lyft driver was like, "Oh, I'm from Harlem." He was like, "What part of Harlem are you from?" I told him, "I'm 152nd." He's like, "Oh, you from the Hill," which is true, Sugar Hill, right? Like that's the most kind of precise articulation of where in Harlem I'm from. And the neighborhood has a lot to do with my relationship to literature. Of course, it's a neighborhood with a very rich literary history. Of course, it also has a very rich kind of cultural history. And growing up in Harlem in the 80s and 90s, for me, my pathway into the literary culture of Harlem happened in some ways through hip hop music, through funk music, through soul music. And all of those influences really had a lot to do with my relationship with language. And so I was that little girl who, was in the brownstone, couldn't quite be out running the streets with everybody, but was listening, right? Was listening to how people spoke to one another, listening to those languages that we invented, and listening to especially music. And honestly, music is one of my major literary influences. And it also has a lot to do with my scholarship, right? So in my scholarship, I definitely think of literature as linguistic and cultural expression across genres. And I'm actually really interested in what it means to kind of write across genres. That has everything to do with the fact that I've always been a novelist, really before I became a scholar. And I've always kind of, both literally and kind of, psychically, figuratively, my pathway toward academia and towards scholarly writing had everything to do with my trying to figure out the full scope of my creative instincts and creative impulses, and also my investment in teaching. I really enjoy teaching, and I wanted to figure out the best way to set up a life, really, for myself, where I could do all of those things at once.
Music is all through the novel, all kinds of music, and I was very much drawn to that. Was music a part of your girlhood?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Talk
a little bit was that your parents?
It was my parents, but it was also just, New York, honestly, right? And also just Black folk, I think, you know what I mean? It really was kind of, as much as storytelling and, reading, my parents were, sort of, they are themselves avid readers, and they were very clear that reading was going to be a part of my life early on, and I loved reading as a kid. But, very young, I really didn't distinguish between the value of the written word or the spoken word or the sung word, right? Like all of those ways of expressing in language were really sort of formative for me in terms of how I understood language. So yeah, everything from the little hand clapping games that we played as girls, right? And that's of course often how you kind of learn, what love or what people think love is, and you figure out relationships with your little, patty cake and down baby, right? All of those are forms of storytelling in a way. But they're musical, right? And they're exchange, right? They're kind of like they're ways of communicating and forming community, all of those things. And yeah, absolutely. I really felt I was that kid who was always trying to understand the lyrics to a song, right? So you hear a song and often you mishear it, but I was that kid who would write down and say, okay, well, what are these people really saying? Of course, this is pre-Google, right? Where you can't just look up the actual lyrics. So I spent a lot of time truly studying, right, and analyzing music in order to understand how these artists were using language. And I do think that had a lot to do with me becoming the writer that I am. I'm one of those people who, for better or for worse, I started identifying as a writer as a child. I was 11 years old and was like, this is what I am doing. And in fact, even earlier than that, I would call myself an artist, and I kind of knew that's who I was and who I wanted to be. The upshot of that is that I had a kind of awareness of, what my influences were pretty early on, and music was definitely a major part of that as well.
I think we're gonna pause in the conversation and have Mecca read from the novel at the beginning, and we're gonna do that at first, and then I got all excited.
No, I love it.
So Mecca's gonna read from the novel.
So this is good, and in fact, now that you say that, are y'all hearing that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna improvise, speaking of music, because I was gonna read a section of the novel that, sort of thinks about academia and how it sort of factors into the main character's life. But I think instead, I'm going to read, since we're talking about music, I'm gonna read from a different section. So bear with me as I kind of skip around a little bit. So Big Girl, I think of Big Girl as a novel about Black women, about Black queer people in general, women more broadly, and the paths we take often across generations to make space for ourselves in the world. And the novel follows a character named Malaya Clondon from the time she's a very big 8-year-old girl to the time she's a very, very big Black queer teenager. And we sort of see her, sort of trajectory toward making space for herself vis-a-vis her changing relationships with her family and the world around her, especially the changing landscape of Harlem, New York. So in this section, Malaya is 8. Her mother has been taking her to Weight Watchers meetings, right? And she's trying to kind of navigate what the expectations are of her as a woman or as a girl, sort of en route to becoming a woman. And doctors have recently started to use the language of morbid obesity to describe her body. So speaking of language, she's trying to wrap her mind around what that means. She goes to this elite private school on the Upper East Side, and she's one of the few Black kids at the school. She has a close friend named Shanice, who travels with her from uptown Harlem to the school on the Upper East Side. So this section follows that relationship. My mom gave me extra dulce de coco today, Shanice Guzman said to Malaya after settling into the narrow school bus seat. The motor whirred beneath them as the bus rumbled down Broadway, past the Lin Fong restaurant and La Caridad billiard hall, past the red and yellow awnings of the bodegas blinking their lights against the gray sky. It was raining, and between the din of the motor, the wet rush of traffic, and the older children singing pop songs at the back of the bus, Malaya had to lean in to hear Shanice's quiet voice. She gave me a lot extra, like even more than yesterday. Shanice hoisted her peeling Janet Jackson backpack onto her lap and produced an oily paper bag. Its mouth crumpled to a close. She brought these bags every day to the coffee shop where the Northern Harlem children waited for the bus to whisk them across Manhattan to Galton Academy on Park Avenue. Her lunch was always a collection of the most delicious forbidden foods from Mr. Gonzalez's corner bodega: pork rinds and Doritos and cans of Hawaiian punch, beef jerky and bullseyes with now and laters and quarter water juice, deli sandwiches as thick as fists and 50-cent bodega pies, always accompanied by a handful of dulce de coco candies wrapped in wax paper and grease. These lunches were unfathomable for Malaya, who was instructed every night to pack her own lunch: a tuna or turkey or reduced fat peanut butter sandwich on light bread with light mayo or sugar-free jelly, a cup of light yogurt, a diet juice box, a dry clementine. Thankfully, Shanice was always willing to share her treats. Cool, Malaya said. It was January and cold, but the sleeves of her puffy pink jacket pinched tight at her arms and shoulders. She tugged it off, left arm then right, and balled it up on her lap. These morning rides with Shanice were one of the few pleasures of the school week. They took the bus together every day, stuffing themselves into the small leather seats, feeling their thighs pressed against each other as they ate and talked. Shanice was chubby, not as big as Malaya, but heavy, as Naila, her mother, would say. She was a yellow-skinned girl with hair the color of brown construction paper left out in the sun. Her straightened bob fell stiffly down from her head, swiping at the collar of her jean jacket almost like a white girl's, but with sharp, jagged edges that reminded Malaya of scissors. Naila had vowed not to let Malaya relax her hair until her 16th birthday, despite her most enthusiastic protestations. Every day on the school bus, Malaya looked at the flap and flow of Shanice's hair with envy, stealing pats and rubs of it when no one was looking, which Shanice never seemed to mind. She opened a paper bag of forbidden foods, and together they talked about boys and ate what was for Malaya the second breakfast of the day. We had butter bread and marmalade this morning, Shanice continued, plus plantain and cheese and mango juice. It was real good. Malaya imagined a sheen of butter seeping into a slice of toast thick as a textbook, dollops of sweet orange marmalade flecked with amber spreading over the bread in luxurious swirls. Shanice's voice grew louder as she spoke, and she sat up a little in her seat. My mom was watching, so I couldn't bring you any. Shanice was normally quiet, with a distant expression that reminded Malaya of a bored or irritated adult. But each morning, Malaya watched Shanice's face stretch wide and her cheeks flicker with light as she talked about her mother. Sometimes she got so excited her words tripped over themselves, like when she described the marvelous breakfast her mother had made her: sausages, potatoes, guava bread, and all kinds of jellies. According to Shanice, her mother was a beautiful woman with a name almost as fancy as apple pie a la mode, Patricia, the T and R-I of which stuck fabulously together over Malaya's tongue and slid into a delicious lace of soft S and vowel sounds when she said it. To hear Shanice tell it, Patricia Guzman was a miracle of motherhood. She came from a beautiful place called Santo Domingo, where, in Malaya's mind at least, the sweet dulce de coco candies grew in fields. Malaya had never met Shanice's mother. Shanice usually came to the bus stop alone, and it was her father who attended parent-teacher conferences during the evenings at Galton. Naila, Malaya's mother, had said that this was what happened when people tried to raise families without being married. One always got caught holding the bag. Still, Malaya appreciated the mystery of the woman. She imagined Patricia Guzman tall and curvy as a tomato vine, her blonde hair falling like a splash of lemonade behind her body ever sprawling forward to the rhythm of her name. My mom told me to share the dulce with Rodrigo for my birthday because she knows he likes me. Shanice smiled, revealing a missing canine tooth. Malaya pulled the candy from its oily package and passed the mound of coconut to Malaya. Malaya could not decide which part of the bus ride she liked better, the food or the talking. Shanice was a year older than Malaya and had been admitted to Galton from PS 153, the nearby public school, on scholarship only under the provision that she repeat the first grade. When Malaya got to the first grade, it seemed like Shanice had been there for years, if not forever. Shanice was what Naila called grown and what Mamir, Malaya's grandmother, called fast. Even at 9, she moved like someone who had lived a life and had stories to tell, though she rarely told them in their entirety, which made her even more like an adult. Yet there was a quiet sadness to Shanice that Malaya liked, as though beneath her fierce-set eyes and pudgy frown, what she wanted most was candy and a nap. Sometimes Shanice's hair and skin and savvy scared Malaya. Every now and then, she worried that she would one day become the pretty girl like the 4th grader Amandra Wilson, leaving Malaya behind. So she simply made a point of not talking to Shanice much among the wealthy kids at Galton. Shanice's father, Jerome Armstead, was a quiet Jerry curled man who worked long hours on the sales floor at the home and office depot on the Upper West Side, which meant that her family was even further from wealthy than Malaya's. This idea comforted Malaya, though she knew better than to say so. "This boy in my block likes me too," Malaya said, hoping to sound casual. "I mean, he sweats me. His name is Matthias. He has hazel eyes and he's fly." She rolled her neck a little like she had seen the older girls on the block too. "That's cool." Shanice fidgeted with a strap on her backpack and looked out the window on the bus as the bus neared the elevated train tracks on 125th. "You want to come over later?" Malaya asked. "Giselle, she's making her Haitian patties and rice. My mom said you can come." She put another candy in her mouth, trying not to sound too eager as she waited for a response. Shanice came to the brownstone after school several afternoons a week, which gave the two a chance to feel each other's bodies and touch each other's hair all they wanted. This was one of the few times Malaya's roundness worked in her favor. Shanice's weight was concentrated tightly and evenly from her shoulders to her ankles, giving her body a banana-like bulge. Malaya, on the other hand, was round everywhere, and though she had no waist to speak of, she did have soft, deep cups of flesh around her nipples that could pass almost for breasts. This meant that when she and Shanice played, Malaya got to be the girl. They would sneak together into the family room on the second floor while Giselle, the babysitter, cooked dinner upstairs, taking towels from her parents' bathroom and pinning the ends to the floor with her mother's Malian statues, sliding her grandmother's old rocking chair to the center of the circle to give their towel tent a shape. Malaya would lie beneath Shanice, squeezing herself against her body until she started to warm. When the feeling got good, she would lock the slick tufts of Shanice's hair between her knuckles and wriggle her hand, letting the strands prickle the crevices between her fingers, sending little bolts of feeling down her armpits and the folds of her legs. Sometimes she would imagine Shanice was Dondre Harris, the 5th grader, and she was Amandra Wilson. Sometimes Shanice would slide her arms into Malaya's sweatshirt sleeves and press her palms against Malaya's, so it looked like the small, butter-colored hands coming out of the shirt were Malaya's own. They never talked about these games. Outside of the brownstone, the closest they came to touching was the press of one's leg against the other as they ate candies on the school bus. Yeah, Shanice said finally, I can come over. My mom won't mind. She was still turned toward the window, distant, but it didn't matter. Malaya took another dulce, the crisp coconut shreds melting in her cheeks and leaving moist brown pads of sweetness on her fingertips. As the bus turned east toward Central Park, the older children began to sing a song Malaya had heard playing often on the street outside her window at night. It was a fast-clapping song about a pretty, dangerous girl who made boys fall in love with her simply by smiling. Harlem was full of these songs about love, about lonely boyfriends, angry girlfriends, and people who were so happy they could neither sleep nor eat and could manage only to sing. Malaya listened to these songs closely every night, repeating them to herself in the mirror and writing the lyrics in her diary so that when they cropped up in the back of the school bus, she could imagine herself back there too, next to Dondre Harris, belting a wondrous duet about the love they shared. This song's chorus was a soaring lament about how the girl had driven the boy crazy, ensnaring his every thought with her butt and her inexorable charm. Dondre's waves drizzled over the air and the whir of the bus's motor in the rain. While Shanice talked about her weekend with her mother, Malaya danced with Dondre in her imagination, fast moves like in her African dance class, then slower, closer, like in her towel tent games with Shanice. Caught in her fantasy, she did not notice when the song stopped. She heard only Dondre's voice lingering in the air. If I were you, I'd take. He hesitated, and Malaya's chest fluttered as the next line pushed up in her throat. She sat up and looked over the back of her seat, jostling Shanice's hips with her own and her elbows, pressing her belly against the hard leather. Dondre was sitting alone in the last row, his backpack beside him, saving room for Amanda Wilson. A run of black curls sat neatly on the top of his head, and the faded edges at either side of his face peeked out over the seat. Stretching a little, Malaya could see his smooth brown forehead, his mouth slightly open, his eyes straining to remember the next word. Precaution, Malaya sang, her own voice so loud it startled her. Dondre raised his head above the seat. Before I step to meet a fly girl, Malaya murmured, shrinking back and lowering her eyes. And it's a potion, Dondre sang. He wrinkled his eyes into a smile and nodded at Malaya. You'll think she's the best thing in the world. Then he turned to the sixth grade boys across the aisle and sang the rest of the line to them. He had gotten the lyrics wrong, but it didn't matter. Malaya settled back into her seat and luxuriated. He had seen her, had smiled at her. Malaya had become, for an instant, that fly girl to whom someone like Dondre would sing. The feeling would become familiar later, the nervous thrill of having something to offer. Her face lit with possibility. She stuffed the dulce back in its bag, and for the rest of the ride, while Shanice described the delicious empanadas Patricia Guzman had made the night before, Malaya counted her bread points. The sandwich she had would cost her 1 bread point, plus at least 2 proteins for the turkey and 1 milk for the cheese. The dulce would cost her another bread, and she'd have to add it to her week's tally of forbidden foods. She would skip lunch, she decided, pulling her Hello Kitty diary from her backpack. She calculated her point values on a blank page. If she was careful enough throughout the day, she'd even be left with 2 breads for dinner. Even if Giselle made her viande boeuf non-sauce with its wondrous burst of meaty juice, Malaya would eat only a little. She would find commitment, control. No matter what happened as the day went on, she would think about Amandra's popsicle stick body and Shanice's boyfriends, about her own glorious song with Dondre, and she would make herself stop. Today, she would not mess up. Malaya turned to tell Shanice about her decision. But just at that moment, Shanice swallowed the last of her dulce. Malaya turned to tell Shanice about her decision. But just at that moment, Shanice swallowed the last of the dulce, licking the sticky juice from her fingers. Malaya said nothing, unsure that her friend would understand.
So we got a little taste of this beautifully written, and I'm not exaggerating, beautifully written novel, Mecca. Tell us what motivated you to write the novel. And I want to also say to the audience, I spent last night reading what the critics have to say. They are ecstatic. You should be very happy. is going to get many awards already. And as we know, for a first novel, sometimes this doesn't happen, so you should feel very happy.
I do. I really do.
So tell us what motivated you to write the novel. Tell us how long it took you,
Sure.
and a little bit of the writing process.
Yes, okay, so what motivated me to write the novel? So as I mentioned, right, I was an 11-year-old, that was the time in my life where I decided I needed to write a novel, or that I needed to be a writer. And honestly, it may sound like hyperbole, but this is the novel that I wanted to write at that time. And it's because, my mother had a fantastic Black feminist library in our home. And, at 11, I'm reading The Bluest Eye, Toni Morrison. I'm reading Entezaki Shange's For Colored Girls. My grandmother had a copy of Sassafras, Cypress, and Indigo, which is Entezaki Shange's first novel. And a little bit later, I discovered Audre Lorde. All of these were works that I connected with profoundly at that age. Reading these works definitely sort of helped me to imagine that a Black girl's life could be something to write about, and that a Black woman could make her life writing Black women's stories, right? And those were just two very kind of profound realizations for me, especially to have at an age where I didn't know what that would entail, right? I just thought, oh, someone can do this. I can do, Toni Morrison can do it. Cool, great. Now I know, now I know what I'm gonna aim for in life, what I want to be when I grow up. And also reading those books at that time, I knew that I connected with, again, the kind of literary evocation, the literary sort of articulation of the complexities of Black girlhood in a way that I knew I needed as a Black girl. And yet, for me, there was a part of my story of Black girlhood that was missing. And that was about body shape and size, right? The focus on not only my coming to understand my own body, but also the way in which my body was a focal point of many folks around me. In the same way that in The Bluest Eye, Pacola's hair and skin, right? This becomes not only something that she has to kind of contend with in her own coming of age journey, but it's it structures the social world around her. And I had an awareness that was also happening for me with my body, and not just my own body, right? Like all of the girls around us, the question of fatness and thinness, this was a major sort of part of Black girl culture and Black woman culture that I was keenly aware of, perhaps too aware of, that I didn't see reflected as a kind of centerpiece of a Black girl story in a way that I needed to see reflected. So between recognizing the possibility of Black woman writer life and recognizing the need to tell a story about a big Black girl, and specifically a big Black queer girl, I was off to the races, as they say. And of course, then I was like, well, cool, I'm gonna just graduate high school, I'll go to college, write this novel, and then, hello world, here I come, right? And of course, life doesn't always work out exactly as you imagine it. So in terms of the long process, it was long. This was actually a much earlier version of this book was my master's thesis at Temple University before I even started the PhD program. To tell you how long ago that was. And it was, so I won't give years, but it was a long time ago. And there too, I kind of thought, okay, well, I want to write this novel. Writing it while I was working on my undergraduate degree didn't work out in the way I thought, which I did lots of other great things as an undergrad. Writing a novel wasn't one of them. So, but I, lived life, right? Had life experience. So then I thought, okay, I'll get this master's degree. This is when I'll write the novel. And I did. I came out with a draft, but it was, it was a huge draft. It was a very big draft, and it was a draft that hadn't quite found its own path toward, self-completion or self-efficacy. And, then I thought, okay, well, I did learn during that process that I love teaching. And so I thought, okay, I'll do this PhD and I'll write this novel real quick while I'm working on this PhD. And then here it is, and I'll be out, ready to sit on Oprah's couch and all of that. And of course, that's not how PhD programs work. And so, but in many ways, I came of age with this novel, right? And never, there are some folks in the audience who have been through this journey with me. I think it's safe to say, even in the moments where, I might have been unsure about whether the book would ever happen, my commitment to it never flagged. I always knew this was the book I needed to write, and it was a book I needed to write, and it was honestly, it was the book I needed to write in the sense that it was the book that made me want to be a writer, made me want to understand myself as a writer, even through the other book projects that I've worked on, and other projects. Shimona, you mentioned work with Sinister Wisdom. All of that has to do with understanding the power of literary expression from the point of a practitioner, right? Like, I wouldn't understand any other aspect of my work the way I do if I didn't understand that this was a book that I needed, and therefore I imagine others must need it too.
One of the things that I want to remember, Bluest Eye is very painful. One of my favorite novels, but it is very sad and very painful. This novel, without talking about the ending very much, it's a triumph story. I don't want to sound cliche, it's a happy ending, but she emerges. So at the end of the novel, we can say that her resistance and her resilience makes us happy.
Yes.
And so we're not crying and sad at the end. And very few of our stories end up in that way. The other thing that I want to say, and you let us know when we need to turn to the audience because I'll be talking forever. The character portrayal in this novel is extraordinary. So it's not just the protagonist, but it's the father, whom I want you to talk a little bit about, the mother, the grandmother, the friends. So I was amazed at your ability to carefully craft a range of characters, and they're very different.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. That means a lot to me. So first of all, to your point about the ending, I love the idea that it ends in a triumph, right? We need to triumph.
Yeah.
Often we do triumph, and if we didn't, we would survive, or we wouldn't still be here. And I do think, and this comes a lot from my investment in Black feminist literature, that our survival is a triumph. The fact that we survive, the fact that we have continued to survive for generations, that's something worth celebrating. And I wanted this novel to constantly reflect the simultaneity, right? The kind of duality of pain, struggle, trauma, sadness, triumph, celebration, joy. And my hope is that, as we read, we're experiencing all of those things, because that's life. And I think to me, that's a true articulation of what a big Black girl's life is, right? All of those things at once. And then Malaya insists on celebrating, right? She celebrates she celebrates in spite of what is expected of her. And in many ways, she celebrates in ways that are forbidden. Like, she's like, I love French fries. I'm gonna love French fries. If you're trying to take French fries from me, you're against me, right? And like, she willfully holds on to her pleasure. And I think that to me rings true in my own experience, and also the experience of a lot of the Black women and women in general, queer people, that I know that in order to survive, we have to hold fast to our pleasure and our sense of joy. So I wanted that to come through. And to your point about the other characters, I think every character in some way is fighting for their happiness and their survival in different ways. And Malaya's body and just, Malaya herself becomes kind of a ground on which these different visions of what survival should look like come to clash in a way, right? So her father, Percy, for him, survival is very much about class mobility. It's about making sure that nobody ever goes hungry. It's about, because he grows up hungry, right? And so for him, he wants to provide for his family. It's about masculinity, right? What it means to, be the right kind of man and provide for a family in a particular kind of way. Meanwhile, her mother, Naila, her vision of success and of sort of wholeness and wellness and survival has a lot to do with a particular kind of womanhood, which means thinness for her. And of course, it's a sort of mirage for her, right? She never gets there. Her mother has never gotten there, but still she believes that this is going to, when the women in our family have made it, it's when one of us is thin. And, that imperative to become thin and her father's imperative to never be hungry clash. And they clash on the kind of ground of Malaya's body. In order to convey that, I really needed to make sure that all of these characters were portrayed in all of their complexity. And it has a lot to do with, again, Black feminist theory, this notion of sort of writing And Jazaki talks about sequester in the monolith, right? This is a paraphrase, but if you are Black and female in the United States, there's one single solitary voice for you. You are sequestered in the monolith. The idea that we can only be one kind of person, Audre Lorde, right? We do not lead single issue lives. For me, I needed to render the complexity of each of these characters so that they didn't just represent, a patriarchal worldview or just represent the refusal of, kind of classist estimation of Blackness, that they all are conflicted within themselves. And that almost all of them truly do see themselves as loving Malaya, right? And kind of like acting in what they see as her best interest. And so it was important to me to really demonstrate that, even as we see that often their efforts to care for her are misguided, ineffective, and are sometimes, straight up cruel. But that's a cruelty born of the lives that they've led, as opposed to a kind of innate, sort of character flaw or badness in their character.
It's interesting. The mother is a college professor, a graduate degree, and then it's still more important to her than all of those things.
Yeah.
One of the things I was very compelled by Mecca is the way that you handle the sexuality of the character. You never name, them. So their queerness and their complexity and their fluidity is there's nowhere in the novel that says they're queer,
right,
or not,
right.
So that was clearly delivered on your part.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this. In some ways, this is one of the reasons why we have a special guest who just rolled out. This is one of the reasons why queerness is compelling to me as a category as well, right? It means so many different things. It names a relationship to difference. It names a relationship to, sort of a refusal, a certain kind of refusal of social expectation, a commitment to pleasure, even a kind of transgressive commitment to pleasure, without having to claim a kind of like fixed, stable location. In other words, it can breathe, it can grow, it can travel, it can move, all under this sign, this language of queer. Of course, it's the language that Malaya doesn't have access to, but as the reader does, right? And being able to kind of see Malaya commit to her pleasure and to her whim and to her desire in a given moment, so that in the scene that I just read, right, she's desiring a whole lot of things that she's not supposed to desire. She's desiring boys, she's desiring girls, she's desiring candy, she's desiring sandwiches, right? She's desiring forms of freedom and bodily expression that are transgressive. And all of that for me is part of her queerness, whether she uses that language or not. At the same time, though, in talking about the novel, it is important for me, the author, to name her as a queer character, because I don't want that aspect of the novel to be erased. I don't want her to kind of fall out of a conversation about queer literature. Her bodily experience is absolutely a queer experience. I feel that that's for me as the author to name, rather than for her as a character to kind of represent or over-represent.
There's a new filmy version called Black Girlhood Studies. And I'm going to say that this novel will make a significant contribution to Black Girlhood Studies. I don't know of another text that's come out recently that will help us navigate the complexity of Black girlhood. So I just want to say, all of those Black Girlhood Studies people out there, in your syllabus. Where are we on the? Should we open it up?
We can open it up, but you also have a little bit more time if you want to keep talking.
Okay. So let me just give us how do you balance? And very few people do this well. Alexis may be able to say she to this. How do you balance your creative and your academic life? Very few people master the genres that you master. Poetry, novels, theory, criticism, all of that, and I would say equally as well. Okay, because there's some people who do the genres, but you can say, well, she's better at this than that. So how do you balance all of that? And I don't want to use the word master, but do those genres so well.
Well, thank you so much, first of all. This means the world coming from you. I think of it as truly, for me, it's about less about balance and more about really recognizing the source of my work, right? Sort of where it comes from and what I do it for. And all of the folks that we've been talking about, right? The folks who I count among my influences, my pantheon, they all are writing in multiple genres. And they're writing in multiple genres sometimes at the same time. They're making up new genres. They are exploring particular themes or ideas across multiple genres, even in a given year or a couple of years. And that, again, that's where I started, right? So, before I even sort of thought to imagine theoretical and critical and creative exploration or expression as sort of distinct things, I was like, let me see what Ntozake is doing. Let me read all of it. Let me read all of what Audrey is doing. And it wasn't until I became, sort of disciplined that it wasn't until I became sort of institutionally enfranchised in specific disciplines that I realized that these distinctions are a thing, as the kids say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because they aren't. And so over time, I came to realize that these are distinctions that are disciplinary, they're institutional, but they are not intellectual. And that's something that I've had to remind myself over the years, right? So it's not to say, I kind of, I was like, whatever Audrey does it, Tony does it, I'm good. That isn't the case, because of course, as I came up within these institutions and started to see just how real some of these disciplinary boundaries are, it became difficult for sure, but I had to kind of keep reminding myself. And again, I have fantastic people in the room who have helped me remind myself, right, when there have been moments where I have not known for sure whether I could do both or all of these things. And so like having community around me to reflect that back to me has been really important. But honestly, I do, and this I tell this, I talk to grad students a lot who are trying to decide whether they want to do an MFA or a PhD. And there are some, right, who want to do both or want to figure out a way to do both. For me, it's always about figuring out what is the joining factor, what is the through line, what is it that you want to say? I think there's nothing wrong with being multilingual. And in fact, that's a power, right? That's a gift. If you can say what you want to say in as many languages as possible, the better, all the better for you and for us. But I think knowing what it is that you want to say is the kind of key so that you can figure out how to, sort of navigate those acts of translation, both in terms of the actual creative expression and the kinds of professional translation you'll have to do to make sure your work is taken seriously in multiple spaces.
So, more novels coming?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And will they have some themes?
Yes.
Okay.
For sure. I think I might be one of those people who's, kind of always thinking about these themes of Black girlhood, embodiment, queerness, family relationships. I don't foresee becoming disinterested in those topics anytime soon.
So and this is always a difficult question. What besides the Blue Sound, what other novels, you mentioned Ntozake Sassafras, what other more recently published novels have had a big impact on you?
So it's interesting. This is one of the things that has been challenging about balancing my academic life with my creative life. I don't get to read as much contemporary fiction as I would like, right? I think that's what we all sort of experience. So what I would say, and there are definitely many that I go to for a sense of kind of community and sustenance. But in terms of influences while I was writing, this is not particularly recent at all, but Jamaica Kincaid, everything that Kincaid writes. She's somebody who I feel like I can just hang out with her narrators forever. And true, she tends to revisit certain themes, but I'm here for it every single time, and I feel like I get something from it every single time. In terms of contemporary, I feel like I can just shout out some of my writer sister friends. I happen to be looking at Dolan Perkins Valdez's Take My Hand. Her novel Wench definitely was something that I thought about, especially as I was working out the structure actually of Big Girl, because I'd gone back and forth between kind of point of view strategies, and so Wench takes on a kind of a shifting point of view that's similar to some of the modernist writers that I've been thinking about. So there have been moments where I did some experimentations there. Tiffany Yannick's work as well, especially her short stories actually, She's a writer who I think tackles place in really sort of precise, keen ways, place through voice, which is something that I'm interested in my short stories, but also in the novel. My dear friend Caitlin Greenidge also, in terms of the way she thinks about Black family structures and class and the complexities of Blackness and class. Many others. But I will say this novel is definitely a product of a deep engagement with Black feminist literatures, especially of the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s.
So have your parents read it?
They have.
And what do they think?
It's fascinating. So my dad was I sent them both to the galley when it first came out, because I was like, okay, let's get ready. And my dad was live texting me as he read it, which was so amazing. It was a really wonderful experience. I think they both like it. I think they're proud, which is, of course, in some ways that's kind of all you want, right? But my dad's commentary has really, especially during those texts when he first read it, he's from Harlem, so he was very much thinking about how, the personification of the neighborhood, he seemed to be into that. He liked the descriptions of the food and the kind of sensory description. So he's a great reader. Like I said, both my parents are really, sort of dedicated readers in general. So it's been pretty great and pretty sort of heartening to see them read my work in that way.
What was the most challenging or difficult aspect of writing the novel? Because there are some moments in it that are painful.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think back to a conversation that Alexis and I had at Durham about this. In some ways, those challenging parts, I don't want to say they weren't challenging to write, but I don't think they were any more challenging. So we're talking about parts that depict trauma, right? I don't think writing those scenes was any more challenging than writing any other aspect. Talking about them has been challenging because it does require me to be more aware of how they impact the reader in a different way, right? For me, generally, as I'm writing fiction, I'm sort of thinking that my experience of the fiction is going to be similar to, or I'm in touch with what the reader's experience is going to be. And so in talking about those scenes, I've confronted that, okay, readers are having a different relationship to some of these scenes. And of course, that makes sense. I have lived in a body similar to Malaya's, is how I grew up. And many, many people haven't had that experience. So there's been a very interesting kind of, I don't want to say a clash, but just a distinction. There's a difference between my experience of some of those scenes and, when readers talk to me about how they've read those scenes. But honestly, the most difficult part of writing this book really was just kind of writing 2 other books while I was working on it, and living life and, getting jobs and getting the degree, the logistical, pragmatic part was hard. It wasn't easy. But again, I feel like I've had great support, along the way. So, do you want me to talk about good? Okay.
I'm gonna have the rest of the folk in here also participate. That was great.
Either house want to start us out? We do have.
If you don't mind, introduce yourself.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Nico Walia. I was happy to be a good friend of mother's. I'm from New York. I wanted to backtrack to your relationship with music. As you know, I'm a musician myself, and the beautiful thing, or one of the magical things that I love about music is that it transforms as you transform. I'll just give an example. I was in the car the other day, and Tina Marie's Deja Vu came on, right? And I was a child when it came out. Deja Vu.
Yes.
But now I'm a Buddhist, and I had different ears. I was like, oh my God, this is a really explicit song about reincarnation. And so I grew into the music, though it's been in my life all this time. So I'm curious how the words, since this novel has been in your life for some time, how have your own words transformed as you've transformed?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. Yes. my words have transformed as I've grown. I do feel, and I kind of referenced this, kind of offhand a few minutes ago, I do feel like I've come of age with this novel. I mean, it's true, I have, literally. But also, it's really interesting to see a novel like this. When I first started imagining this novel, it really wasn't that long after, Beloved had come out, right? I mean, I was young, I was a kid, and it was still the 90s, the early 90s, in fact, and I'm sort of thinking about what it would mean to bring a story like this into, the pantheon of Black women's literature. And as time has gone on, it's been interesting to see that, that felt more and less possible in the intervening years, right? Like toward the end of the 90s, then you had the early 2000s. There were many years where it felt like a novel like this, I wasn't sure that it would matter to people, honestly. Or that's not fair. I wasn't sure to whom it would matter. I wasn't sure it would matter enough to earn the support that I felt that it would deserve, you know what I mean? And, to reach all the people that I felt like I wanted to reach with this novel. And so this is not necessarily about sort of my words maturing, but it has been really interesting to see this novel sort of emerge in a moment that seems to be more ready for it than I would have imagined, than I could have imagined, to be honest with you. Like some of the things that you're talking about, like total dreams come true, you know what I mean? And that's something I've been noticing my own response to that, and noticing that it marks a kind of growth on my part, just in the sense that like I'm noticing that there are things that are possible that I didn't know would be possible, and I love that like this character is showing me that, So thank you for that.
Can you speak to, since you're talking about growing up with your novel,
Yeah.
I think that's an experience that many fiction writers have, but they don't talk about it that much, and I appreciate you talking about it. Can you share a little bit about how you knew that you were grown enough to finally be done and turn it in? Because I think that's the question that a lot of people say. It's like, okay, I can let this go.
You know what? That's a really good question. No one has asked me that. I think it was when I made a commitment to revising it, because I don't like revision. I don't, and I wish I did. I admire, I think about Kiese Layman. I admire people who embrace revision as a kind of creative mission or something. You know what I mean? Like a vocation or I don't know. I don't have those feelings about it. So I do think, that it was about when I really made the decision, okay, like I have this, like I said, my master's thesis was sprawling, it was gorgeous, but it was really needed to find itself in a way. And when I made the decision to do that work, I do feel like that was a kind of coming of age for me. And again, that was many years ago, right? So like it's been an ongoing process of continuing to work on this book. But I think with each step, it does feel like it has felt like a growing up in a way.
Was there an editorial team that helped you go from sprawling to a little bit more refined?
Yes, many people, an editorial team, a street team, a care team, I have lots of teams, but I should shout out. So my advisors and mentors at Temple University, including Samuel Delaney, was fantastic. Daryl Pinkney has been incredibly helpful throughout the process. But honestly, in the acknowledgements, I call this person the novel's fairy godmother, Nina Sharma, who's a fantastic memoirist and comedic writer who's got a book coming out very soon. She has been like the street team in terms of kind of reading drafts and rereading drafts, and she's been from job. And then again, lots of folks here who have read parts or just kind of held my hand through it. I feel really grateful.
I love that.
Thank you.
We have an audience question from Bettina. What role do you imagine Harlem takes in the novel? It reads as its own character made manifest in relation to our protagonist.
I love it. Hey, Bettina, you get a lot of shout outs in the audience. I think I appreciate that question. Absolutely, right? I do see Harlem as a character, and in many ways, we meet Malaya when she's at the start of a kind of, sort of a transition, a transformation. We also meet her in Harlem, as Harlem is at the start of a kind of transformation. And so, you know, her relationship to Harlem, again, she finds sort of self and identity in Harlem. She also still is kind of an outsider, right, in Harlem, because of her size, because of the fact that she doesn't go to school in the neighborhood, right, and she's, you know, she doesn't play on the corner, right, and she can't jump double dutch and all of these things that separate her from the community. And yet, that's the complexity of Harlem. Harlem is, you know, all of these things, including her, right? And she comes to understand that as she comes to understand her own complexity. So I see Harlem as a character that evolves sort of in relationship to the passing of time, to gentrification, but also, you know, in relationship to Malaya's perception of it, right? And that has everything to do with Malaya's own sort of growth within the neighborhood. So I see it as a kind of reciprocal relationship of rich, complex, you know, entities, characters.
Was there any research you had to do in terms of checking your memory against reality?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's exactly what it was too. I mean, and luckily for me, you know, in addition to, you know, whatever, Google Maps and, you know, but even that is hard, right? Because when you talk about a gentrifying neighborhood, it really is true. There's, you know, the record is slim. And there's this sense that often it's an archive or a landscape that is slipping away. So trying to figure out, okay, you know, not only what corner is this store on, but was it on that same corner in 1989? Or, you know, how many brownstones were there at that time, and when did that change, and especially the disappearing of stores, right? Like, how many bodegas were there on the corner in this year, and what was the year that all of the, you know, restaurants got swept away? And so I did have to do a lot of kind of checking my memory, and some of those things, you know, it was difficult to find. Luckily, my parents still live in the house that I grew up in, and my dad has that kind of, you know, memory. So there were many moments where I had to call him and be like, Dad, you know, is that store still on 123rd Street? And you know, my parents were very generous with that. But that process, to your point about what were the kind of difficult aspects, chronicling the gentrification of Harlem was actually emotionally difficult. You know, because it's a difficult thing, and there is a great sense of loss. And in many ways, though Malaya triumphs, you know, I don't know that we see Harlem triumph in the novel. It's hard to make the argument. I think Harlem has triumphed in that it's still there. And it's still Harlem. Like, you know, even when it may change, it's different, it's very different. There's a sense of loss, but every time I go home, I know I'm home, right? And so I feel that sense of triumph. But in terms of the story, that is maybe a little bit less prevalent. So, you know, sort of resurrecting and kind of re-encountering the historical landscape of Harlem was a little bit challenging.
Anybody in this space have one last question?
You know, I was wondering, did you have difficulty getting a publisher? That's what I wanted to ask.
So I was fortunate. What were you gonna say?
No, yeah, and I think I know what you're gonna say, but share with the audience.
I was fortunate. So I was fortunate to be working with an agent who had editorial experience and had a lot of patience, and also kind of worked with me through Blue Talk and Love, my short story collection. So I was kind of working on multiple things at one time. So we were able to kind of keep coming back to the novel. But it was interesting, though, there was a moment, to your question also, Yara, about the moment where I said, okay, now it's done. There was definitely a time where my agent and I were going back and forth about whether we needed to do another revision. And I kind of felt that I felt like it was the time, and that had also to do with it. I felt like maybe this was the time that the book would be likely to find the right publisher. And so I was fortunate that I had interest from a couple of houses, and I could not be happier with the publisher that I brought with, which is Norton Live Right. Shout out to Gina Iaquinta, a fantastic editor who I'm so happy to be working with. So, you know, it was a long process, but I couldn't be happier with how it turned out.
All right.
Yeah.
We have one final question from our virtual community, Brianna, who, again, I'm sure folks in this room love. No one loves.
Yes.
My guess is it's that Brianna. Asks, Big Girl traverses your sojourn through girlhood, much like young Audrey and Zammy. In what ways did you grow, transform by writing through memory?
Thank you, Ben. Hey, you two are getting love from the audience. So yeah, I mean, well, what's interesting is that I do want to kind of say, I don't think of big girl as traversing my growth experience, you know, only in the sense that it has been very important to me to understand Malaya as a character separate from me, even though as we were talking about, I do feel like I sort of grew up, in a way I feel like I grew up with this character, you know what I mean? Like I feel like I grew up with Malaya, I grew up understanding her as somebody who, you know, who I needed to read about, right? And in the same way that I needed to read about Pecola, needed to read about Denver, needed to read about Sassafras and Indigo, you know, that too was a kind of like evolving relationship for me. But in terms of my own growing up, you know, in the process of writing the novel, I do think, again, that I think it's a happy ending in the sense that like, this novel is reaching people in a way that I really always dreamed of. And I'm not, you know, I smile a lot and I think of myself as a warm person, but I'm not like a particularly like happy person, you know what I mean? It's so like, you know, it's interesting to really see a dream come true, to experience that and to have that experience, you know, as a grown woman, right? Where it isn't just a dream, it's a dream that's the result of lots of work, lots of labor, lots of support. But to see that actually come to fruition and happen in a way that I think it seems to be really kind of like meaningful for other people, that's something that's been really meaningful for me. And it truly is like learning something about life, you know, in a way that has been pretty great.
I love that, thank you. We're going to thank our friends who are watching at home. This is a beautiful literary community who's with us. Lots and lots of folks who are part of this community. We want to encourage folks, if you do not have a copy of Big Girl yet, or you need to buy like 5 for all your friends in the library, you can click the teal button at the bottom of the screen to do that. You also can support Charis Circle today in our work by clicking that donate button. But thank you to Sinister Wisdom. Thank you to all of you watching at home. We are going to say goodnight to you right now.